Yo, what is good, Adam? Dude, it looks like you are camping out in the middle of the night with a nice blue neon light in the background. This is the first time we've done a night episode in quite a while.
Bro, don't you know I'm a full-time Twitch streamer, bro?
It absolutely looks like that, man. Yeah, we're in for a special episode today. We are here with the creator of Ordinal Theory and Runes, Casey. What is good, bro? It's been over a year since we've had this spaces that we've shared together, man. How you doing?
Yo, what's up? Yeah, doing good. Yeah, we did the super early like pre-release Ordinal space together, right?
Yeah, that was, I think it was like September or August of last year, before I even knew what inscriptions were. All we knew were rare sats. That I have a tweet going back that said these are not going to be valuable. And how wrong we were, but how funny it is. We are also joined on stage with one of our regular co-hosts, Bunzy, the favorite memer and Mullet Man.
Yo, what's up, guys? Yeah, thanks for coming through, Casey. This is was at Inscribe Amsterdam, and I mean, just it's crazy to see what your theory and what you've implemented and how far it's gone. It's been quite a ride, so I'm excited to have you on today.
Let's go. Chris, what's good, bro? How are you doing this afternoon?
Yo, doing great, man. Epic show last night. Casey had a ton of fun listening through that. So much energy going towards Bitcoin. Just life is good. Super stoked for today's conversation.
Yeah, and last but certainly not least, we were joined by Trevor. Man, I thought Adam and I were positioned well. We were like, awesome. We have Casey. He has runes. And then all of a sudden he's on the Ordinal show. I'm like, man, foiled by the leaders himself, man. How's it going?
Good, man. You know, you can't front run me, guys. So but I'm here to support regardless. You know, great to hear from Casey more these days, and just want to hear more from Casey. It's great to have him here.
Yeah, absolutely. Adam, I'll let you lead this one off. I know going all the way back to the early days of Ordinals, you were trying to inscribe some stuff. I think, what was it, like in the first few hundred? Couldn't really figure it out. Casey
I'm telling you, I was on with Casey like before it. I mean, Casey had, of course, inscribed his, but everybody was trying to spin up, full nodes or whatever. Casey's nice enough to be on, like, we're like chatting together. He's basically, I don't know if we had a Zoom call going or whatever. He's like hacked my computer. He's on my computer, like controlling my shit. He's like, man, this shit is so fucked up. I don't know what you did. Because I was trying to get it onto an external hard drive, right? On my Mac. And bro, it just was not working. Casey was nice enough. I will always appreciate that he tried. And I don't know how many hours.
That was a rough debugging session. That was a lot of like terminal commands and like, yeah. I don't think we never made it, right? Like we
never made it across the finish line, bro. Never made it.
It's crazy to me that like there's so many people who are trying to inscribe even that early, like when it wasn't like obliterating the mempool, I guess we had already gotten some like I guess maxi hate, and maybe that was what was making it pop off.
Well, I think actually what was actually popping it off were a bunch of the old Rare Pepe guys. They got a hold of the idea early. And of course, they already had the full nodes up and running and stuff, and they knew how to kind of get in there. And so we got a lot of early Rare Pepe guys who jumped on board and did it right at the beginning there. So I think, yeah, that happened. Of course, it's like a lifetime regret that I don't know who was it, Raph and a bunch of other people were like, man, just tell me what you want to inscribe and I'll do it for you. And I was like, nah, don't worry, man. So I'll never have my sub 100 Ordinal, but that was good times back then. But I'd love to get into a little bit about how you how it's been for you. Like, we can get into some details, of course, but I know you guys covered a ton last night about runes and stuff. But I'd love to know how it's going for you, kind of being thrust upon you, in March, April last year. Obviously, it hit you with like a tidal wave, probably way more than you expected it would. What's it been like for you personally to kind of have really huge success and have it thrown at you and all the hate that comes, along with that success? What's that been like?
Yeah, I mean, completely wacky. I mean, one thing is that the hate is actually not like that serious. I go to a lot of Bitcoin meetups. I organize now, not doing so much, the SF Bitcoin Devs developer meetup, and I've never actually got really any hate in person from all the people that I've talked to, including like core Bitcoin devs. A lot of core Bitcoin devs are just kind of bemused by the whole thing. They're like, yeah, I mean, like, I wouldn't buy like an inscription, but like whatever, like they don't care. And they're more likely to really understand Bitcoin's like security model, and to understand that, this is not really a threat to the Bitcoin network. This is just kind of what Bitcoin was built for. So yeah, core devs are mostly just bemused. Some friends who are core devs are like kind of into it. And then a lot of the normal Bitcoiners are like totally fine with it. I think the sort of laser eye cyber hornets is mostly an online phenomenon. It's like,
Yep.
people have their like, little Twitter accounts with their little PFPs, and they're like, they all like go on like toxic maxi Bitcoin spaces and like go crazy, and they're like super hostile on Twitter. But I don't actually think this is a like real life phenomenon. I don't think there is really a room filled with like real laser-eyed maxis who like talk like that. And all the hate that I've gotten online, like I really don't care about. I've been pretty good about that. Like just these like, it's like old man yells at cloud. It's like
Totally.
whatever. Like yeah.
I mean, that's been. I mean, and I think anybody who has any sort of social presence, we all get hate. Everybody on stage probably gets hate at some point. But I that's been my experience too. And being from the historic NFT community, I had some hardcore haters. People who were just incredibly
there's lots of Adam haters out there,
bro. Lots. Well, there's like 3, but I met a couple of them at like conferences. Nice as can be. Oh my God, how you doing, man? Nice to see you.
The online beefs like don't translate into IRL beefs.
Totally.
I kind of heard that a lot of and this is a lot of stuff I simply don't know in terms of like what people were talking about, how things went in the early days, like who was getting into it, like why did things blow up. I was just sort of like on Twitter a little bit, but I was like mostly just this like fire hose of like issues and trying to make improvements to the code. So it's actually really good to hear like what like people's stories of like what was happening, like boots on the ground, you know what I mean? Like what was happening like in the communities and how things were happening. One thing I'm curious about is do you guys know what the reaction, if any, from Ethereum people was to Ordinals sort of in the early days, and even on an ongoing basis? Like, did they view it as a threat? Did they sort of ignore it? And like, did Ethereum people, like people who were into NFTs on Ethereum, did they like sort of immediately get it and be interested in Ordinals, or were they like, no, like this is like not going to pump my Ethereum bags, I have to hate it?
Yeah, I'd say there was some heavy resistance in the beginning, but ultimately, Adam and I had talked about this a lot. You saw this kind of like convergence in the early days of Ordinals between some Solana users, traditional kind of Ethereum PFP communities. You had the counterparty community and Stacks community, and it was kind of this, and I guess Bitcoin SV as well. And all of the communities from the different blockchains, they kind of use their strengths to kind of build on Ordinals. Like a lot of the marketplaces, like Ordinals Wallet, OrdSwap, and Ordinals Wallet were all from the Bitcoin SV community. You had some of the users who came in and did like BRC20 and Bitmap and all these. These were people that were traditionally building on Ethereum. The ones that were really resistant, I guess, are just kind of the, as you call them, the everyday PFP crowd, the ones that you see in like the spaces. But sometimes that really gets lost, I think, within the engagement. They're really just more baiting people than not. But it does seem like the large majority of them are saying that Ordinals are here for now. And ultimately, I think everyone wants to build on Bitcoin. Many people were really pushed away from it during, or I'd say like right after the Bitcoin Cash fork. But NFTs, I think, has really, really brought those vibes back. And then taking those types of principles from the different NFT communities on the different blockchains. You see that now making its way to Ordinals. We'll go ahead with Trevor, and then Good Times right after.
Yeah, I would say the reaction from the ETH maxis was much milder than the laser eyes. I think like most Ethereum people were very supportive and very interested in it, and I think for some people it's just like a little like, because the early days of Ordinals, it was like trading on spreadsheets and running Bitcoin full nodes. They just felt like overwhelmed with like maybe the level of degeneracy and also like the level of technical knowledge that they needed. So they might have felt like they kind of missed the wave. There was like this constant like feeling of like, oh, the 10K is over, so it's too late. And then it was like, oh, the 100K is over, it's too late. And then it's like the million is over, it's too late. Like people just constantly like knew that it was exciting, but maybe just like didn't get around to it kind of thing. And like I think a lot of people had already left the space as well, like the general NFT space. So like there was this very interesting like weird phenomenon where like in the Twitter timeline, like the Ethereum, there was like max pain on Ethereum NFTs, like people whining and complaining every day. And then the Ordinals community were just like, it's like we're on drugs. Like, there was a meme about like this like cartoon where it's like the placebo versus like the test group. And you see like the test group is like dancing in the room naked. And then like on the couch is the placebo group just sitting there bored as hell. And they're like, I think we're the placebo group. And it was kind of like that. And then like we did talk to some like big ETH maxis, like some of us at NFT LA went up to like Snowfro, the like, creator of Art Blocks, and he was just like, I'm not interested. Like, like please stop. Like it was like we're the like 30th person to shill in Ordinals kind of a thing. So I think some people are just like stop shilling me Ordinals. I'm like focused on Ethereum, like from the Ethereum maxis, but they were never like, like trying to shit on it. That was mainly the laser eyes.
Yeah,
the level. Can I just jump in? Like
Yeah,
the level of degeneracy is just like was wacky and continues to be completely insane to me. Like the idea of doing these like OTC trades on like fucking spreadsheets in Discord where you're like, yeah, I'll send you the money. Like here's like a bunch of fucking Bitcoin. Like please send NFT. Please send inscription. And then like you're just praying that people are going to send it back. I think that's one thing is that as a developer, or maybe just me in general, like I'm a pretty cautious person. Ord has a very high level of testing. We write tests for everything, and like I don't really take too many risks with my own money. And so when you build something and you're like very very careful, and then there's just this like unbridled YOLO degeneracy, it's like insane. I just remember like asking people like, oh, like how do you like do these trades? Like is it some sort of like is there escrow? Is it a PSVT? And they're like, nah, bro, it's just like Discord chat.
Casey, were you ever a card collector, or were you into any sort of collectibles when you're younger? Because those early days of Ordinals, it feels like the kind of traditional collectors where you're, if you collect Pokemon cards, that's what I did when I was younger, and you go to like a trade show and everyone's kind of swapping everything back and forth. There's this feeling that, you can hit it big, but it's also very chaotic. I was curious if you ever went through that growing up with any collectibles that you preferred.
Yeah, not big. I mean, I think I played Magic for a little bit, but it wasn't serious at all. I just had a tiny card collection and like played it for like a year or like 2 years when it was like a craze in my school. And then like when I was even younger, I think very briefly I like had like a baseball card collection. But like that's one like weird thing is that like I don't really have a collector mentality. I don't think I own a single NFT aside from like the very, very small number of inscriptions, like the 1.5 inscriptions that I made, one inscription that I bought. I do have a bunch that people have like donated to me, which is awesome. But like it was, when I was designing inscriptions, when I got interested in NFTs, it was really as somebody like looking from the outside in, like seeing all these people doing this thing and like kind of trying to figure out like how they did things and like what they liked, not from the perspective of like a collector myself.
Interesting. Oh, I'm gonna dive into that a little bit later, but first, I want to go to good times.
Yeah. Hey, what's up, everybody? Yeah, I think
good things.
Just to comment on, it's all good. Just to kind of answer the question from my perspective about how ETH people feel about Ordinals. I think everyone that I've talked to and everyone I've observed on spaces and stuff, like people are just really been taken through the ringer with the last 2 years or so of the Ethereum and Solana NFT market. And so when they see something new that they don't understand, they immediately assume that it's bad. which actually is good behavior. I think we actually kind of want to see a little bit more skepticism. But also there's just the aspect of like it is sort of like a very unfinished and evolving market as well as the protocol. So like people are starting to wrap their heads around the technical that are actually involved or that are interested in it right now. But until it gets to a point where like people don't have to understand things like this is the trouble, right? We want people to understand the technical things of how Bitcoin works. We want them to do the custodying themselves. Like we want people to be kind of like Bitcoiners, but it is a large leap. And the thing about Ordinals is it's actually, I think, making that leap easier because it is bringing something that people are more familiar with than the technical. But just in general, I think all the sort of quote influencers in the market and the people with money in their wallets, they do have that skepticism because of what we saw in Solana and ETH over the last 2 years.
Yeah, I would just layer on. It's like I group it into like three groups. It's like one group is the people who are in this space, Jake, Leo, who were like immediately like, oh wow, this is cool, like stuff on Bitcoin. This is cool. We're into it. There's the Snowfro crowd, which are like, oh, somebody's just trying to pump some Bitcoin stuff, pump and dump. We're not interested. And then there's like a third group who are just like oblivious. Like I can't tell you how many spaces I went on. People were like, what are you even talking about, dude? Haven't heard about it. So focused on whatever. Their Solana NFTs or their ETH NFTs, they just don't have time. They don't care. You know what I mean? So yeah, Danny, what's up, man? How you doing?
Hey folks. I think the ironic, since we're comparing Ethereum and Bitcoin now, I think the ironic thing about all this is that Ethereum is so much more complicated than Bitcoin. Bitcoin is such a simple, elegant protocol. We ask people to read the 8-page white paper because it's very approachable. How many people have actually read the Ethereum yellow paper? That thing takes many reads to really get your head around. And even then, it's very complicated.
I read that and it's like absolutely bonkers. I had to sit down with it forever. And then, it's also the case that the Ethereum is described in the yellow paper is not exactly the Ethereum that got implemented. Like it's like, just Absolutely. Like Bitcoin, the white paper leaves out a lot of details. But with Bitcoin, the details are like, I don't know, they're not that crazy. With Ethereum, it's like wacky. There's so many details that aren't in the white paper. And this is not to, shit on Ethereum. It's just like Ethereum is way, way, way more complicated than Bitcoin. Although like it's really interesting. One thing that Bitcoin is like more sophisticated than Ethereum with is the sort of expressiveness of Bitcoin transactions. With Ethereum, like once you get a transaction into a block, you can do like, once it's in a block, you can do all this crazy stuff. Like you basically deploy code and then call that code in the chain. But in terms of that like step between like submitting a transaction and getting into a block, in Bitcoin, it's much, much more, you just have much more expressiveness about how that transaction enters the mempool, and then like replacing it. And then like you can do really interesting things with UTXOs that wind up being like very complicated. Just as an example, Ethereum doesn't really have native multisig. You have to like write a contract that implements multisig in Ethereum. Whereas in Bitcoin, you have this expressivity in the transaction itself. You can say, okay, this is a multisig transaction, and it won't even enter the mempool if the right signatures are not made, right? As opposed to Ethereum, where you can interact with the multisig like contract after your transaction has gotten into the mempool. Even if you don't have like the right signatures or whatever, it's not a security issue because if the multisig contract is written correctly, it will check, the signatures, but it means that you have these weird things where like transactions should fail when really they shouldn't have been processed at all.
Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
And the other thing about the contracts, now we're talking about NFTs, right? So Ethereum NFTs are also more complicated than Bitcoin Ordinals, right? Ordinals is really just the ordinal and then the inscription, and that's it, and you own it. While the Ethereum ERC-721 protocol, right, is implemented every time by someone in a smart contract when they launch a collection. So you have to check if that collection, that smart contract actually does what you expect it to do. And there have been over the years, many mistakes made in those smart contracts where the contract then, kind of, someone finds an exploit. Well, you can't really do that with an ordinal.
I'm actually kind of surprised that somebody hasn't made something on Ethereum, which essentially would be like a smart contract that implemented something very similar to inscriptions, where you have sort of like a single contract, but then anybody can use that contract to mint a Ethereum NFT. But the behavior of that NFT is not determined by like you're not like creating a new contract each time. You're just like sort of adding a item to an existing collection that anybody can add to, which all has the same properties. And you could still do, sort of collections within that by only allowing, so something sort of like parent-child, right? Where you could, create items under items, and you could do all the things that you do with inscriptions, but not on Ethereum, but not with a separate contract each time. I think that's actually kind of like low-hanging fruit. If I was an Ethereum dev, I would probably implement inscriptions on Ethereum, and it could have a lot of the same properties as.
Well, have you heard of ETH-scriptions?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, those
not
are
exactly what you're talking about, but something similar. Yeah.
Yeah, those are really wacky. Those are like they use Ethereum call data, which is like data which I believe is only around at the time that a transaction is made. Like it's in the transaction and you can like interact with it, but it doesn't get added to long-term storage. So it's like a hack to make the data storage cheaper.
Exactly. Yep.
So Casey, we, kind of explained that, the Bitcoin white paper is 8 pages. It's very simple. The Ethereum yellow paper, which I admittedly have not read, is even more complex. The Git book or the handbook for Ordinals is quite simple. Have you intentionally thought about how to prevent Ordinals from becoming this complex kind of protocol that maybe becomes something that follows down the lines of Ethereum, where it's not the original vision that was portrayed and eventually becomes something else because of whether it's some sort of social consensus or technical debt, which we've been kind of starting to see this give and tug relationship. How, as one of the curators or the creator of the protocol, how do you prevent that from happening going forward?
Yeah, I think about that a lot. I think complexity really kills. Like complexity is a huge problem, and I think a lot of engineers are way more tolerant of complexity than they should be, right? Like they just as an example, I never really I knew that royalties were something that existed on other chains and something that like people like some people liked, some people didn't like, and I personally don't like royalties, right? I personally like just think it's like kind of lame and you should just kind of own something. But above and beyond that, I just never could see a good implementation of royalties that didn't either introduce a lot of complexity or that didn't sort of recreate some of the problems with royalties on other chains, essentially that you can always bypass royalties. You can always bypass royalties. So that's sort of an example of something that didn't get added to the protocol because any implementation that I could see would just make things like way more complex. And I think that's something that is just a very like a characteristic of like how I do things is I try to make things really simple, and I kind of just don't think that complexity is acceptable, even if you get some even if you get some nice features out of it. And so on an ongoing basis, people have a lot of ideas for things that ordinals could do or inscriptions could do, things like staking or just all sorts of stuff. And regardless of whether those things are like good features or not, they're just very complicated. And so I just don't really pursue them. And then I'm also cognizant of the fact that it's not good. The other thing that complexity does is if you create a very complex protocol, it essentially invites this constant tweaking, either because something needs to be improved or because it doesn't work quite right on the first time. And I think that we see that with Ethereum. Ethereum is very complicated, and I mean, I don't know offhand how many hard forks Ethereum has had that like change a lot of the functionality. But that's the reason that they have to do all these hard forks is essentially because it's very, very complicated. Whereas Bitcoin, does have periodic soft forks, but those soft forks tend to be very, very limited, and they tend not to be things which are really addressing core issues of the Bitcoin design. They're like sort of these localized improvements that you can just ignore them if you're another user, whereas with Ethereum you can't. And I think that's down to the complexity of Ethereum, and that's something that I hope to avoid with Ordinals and later with Runes. Is like I want to create things that don't create this pressure to constantly change and tweak it, because I think that's a very bad centralizing force. At a certain point, I want to get to the protocol where it's like done, and people want to change things. Like there just is no appetite to change it. There's no like sort of committee of people who are constantly tweaking, and you can influence them to change the protocol, right? I don't even want. I want to be able to like have there be eventually like a kind of social consensus that ordinals are done, and then like anybody who wants to change something, unless it's like a radical improvement, like nobody has the appetite for that, because they're like, yeah, like just leave it alone. Like we don't have this culture of constant tweaking. And when you make something very complicated, it creates a culture of constant tweaking where everybody sort of expects it to be changed. And obviously this can make it possible to make good changes, but this also politicizes development and also makes it less likely that people reject bad changes.
Very cool. I actually, I guess one of the things I wanted to talk to you about a little bit has to do with, when we first talked to you, definitely got the sense, and you still have, you've maintained the same kind of persona that you're very much, what I would traditionally call a Bitcoin maxi, not laser eye, but certainly in the maxi camp. But the kind of the big question, which I know you've talked about a little, but just like mindset, what would make you then do, shitcoins, dive into shitcoins further and kind of put obviously, BRC20s happened kind of organically, right? And we joked about it. I joked about it a lot, how, you create ordinals, you create this cool protocol, and then the shitcoiners come in. It's hilarious. But then you actually, by creating runes, you're like actually leaning into it. What are you thinking about, like personally, like what, because that you will get, maybe some shit from, hardcore Bitcoiners for, like, what made you say to yourself, actually, I do want to do this though, and maybe take the hit, or, maybe bend a little bit away from, the way I was a year ago, in order to lean into this? Like, what's changed maybe over the course of a year that would kind of allow you to do that?
Yeah, I guess I'm diving headfirst right into the shitquiddity. Yeah, I mean, like nothing has really changed with my perception on shitcoins and shitcoining. I mean, I would even tell people like, hey, like if you're investing in inscriptions or you're investing in like rare and exotic sats, like listen, like take care of your like Bitcoin bags first. Like this is like super speculative. It's to me like, it's not even in the same class as Bitcoin, right? Like I love inscriptions, I love rare sats, like they're my baby, but in terms of like what I would advise people to actually buy, and also kind of what I think has the potential to change the world, like Bitcoin is just way, way, way above those things. Like it's just in a very, very different class. So yeah, and then as far as like runes and getting into it, so watching like BRC20 take off, I mean, one, like obviously I was like, Jesus Christ, like why did like these shitcoiners wait for me to come up with this like exquisite sat tracking thing so they could publish JSON blobs on Bitcoin? It was like, Jesus Christ. And also it was kind of interesting to me. It was like, just aside from any, details about the protocol or like BRC20, like it's like, why now? It's like, you could have done this before. You could have made all that stuff fit in op return. It didn't really require SegWit or Taproot. So it's really interesting to me, like why that happened now. And then in terms of my perception, well, or like my sort of take on shitcoins, it's kind of similar to my take, one of my takes on NFTs, which is that, well, NFTs have product market fit, like definite product market fit. People like it. People like making them. People like using them. I kind of don't think that they're ever going to go away, sort of regardless of what people feel about them. And so I think that them being on Bitcoin is great. Like if you've got some like art market somewhere, kind of independently of what you think about the art or if it's good investment, like wouldn't it be nice if it ran on Bitcoin, right? And NFTs, Bitcoin, like maxis always talk about like some Bitcoin circular economy, like they want to go buy their alternatives to seed oils and their like guns and ammo in Bitcoin from other people who like take Bitcoin and have some like circular economy, when if you look at NFTs, they're like one of the largest circular economies in the world, right? Ethereum NFTs, people buy NFTs for Ethereum, they sell NFTs for Ethereum. Like if you want like if you're in that community and you want to send somebody money for like a product and service, there's a good chance that you do that with Ethereum. And so I think Bitcoin like can't ignore those things, right? I think you want to like do those things on Bitcoin. It gets people using Bitcoin like as a money, even not just for those things that they're buying and selling, right? If you're already like buying and selling NFTs for Ethereum, it's a very small leap to start using it for other things. So I think bringing that to Bitcoin, bringing the fees to Bitcoin is one of the reasons that I did inscriptions, and kind of one of the reasons that I was like, okay, maybe I'll do shitcoins. Is that, if you have like Las Vegas, right? Like, regardless of what you think about Las Vegas, like it's not going to go away. Like casinos are not going to go away. Gambling's not going to go away. So wouldn't it be great if like one of the largest casinos in the world took Bitcoin, right? And shitcoining is not going away. People love shitcoining. And I think that, doing that'd be great, is if they're going to do their like, gambling or whatever, like do it on Bitcoin, like make that part of the Bitcoin circular economy. So I guess another thing is that,
go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say that another thing is that I do think some of the like shitcoin culture, especially like the shitcoin culture on with BRC20s and other like sort of meme coins on Bitcoin, is kind of endearing. Like I think it's kind of like a cute culture. Like everybody's like memeing and everybody's with their like fucking Pepes, and like when I do like runes and I've said like I'm never gonna do an airdrop, they're like, when airdrop, like please sir, when airdrop. And I'm like, how do I incentivize people to use runes on fucking Signet? And they're like, airdrop, definitely airdrop, sir. Like I think it's kind of like a funny kind of like cute culture. And like one part of the broader shitcoin culture that I really don't like and I think is really bad is, a lot of it is just based on these claims for things that just do not work. They're not just like meme shitcoins. They're saying like, this is going to be the future of finance. This is going to be the future of the internet. It's so great. It's going to take over everything. And I think that's how I think that's a much more harmful kind of shitcoining, because I think that is something that gets unsophisticated retail investors to put a lot of money into things and then get absolutely wrecked. Just to go on like a little like tirade, and like my maxi, whatever is going to show a little bit, but like if you look at the vast majority of altcoins, you look at the vast majority of quote unquote Web3, there are almost no applications that anybody would care about aside from speculation. I mean, like Filecoin doesn't work. Like all of the weird DeFi is basically for like sloshing shitcoins back and forth. If you think about like a normal person, like a normal technical person, and you're like, well, how would this person's life be improved by any of these technologies? The answer is like not at all. Like they just don't do what they say on the tin. Whereas what I kind of like about the sort of BRC20 shitcoining is that nobody fucking has that, delusion at all. They're just like, yeah, bro, like buy some Ordi, like buy honk token, like honk, honk, honk. And ultimately, I think that that's like legitimately less destructive, right? And I think that like this sort of like pure, like meme, like fun shitcoining kind of takes the wind out of the sails of like the serious people, right? I mean, when you have like Dogecoin on CoinMarketCap, that has like way bigger market cap than all of these like professional shitcoiners who are saying that it's like the future of like life on Earth. It makes them just look like fucking idiots, that this like shitty dog coin that like nobody's written a line of code for in like 40 years is like just shitting all over their coin. And it kind of shows like how the emperor has no clothes. So the same thing that I would say about ordinals and inscriptions, like, yo, like this is, if you want a serious investment, like this is not it. It's super volatile. Like go buy Bitcoin instead, I would say, for like the memers and the shitcoiners. But like, yeah, if you want to have fun, like do it in a way which is not like making all these claims that are just demonstrably false and essentially like confusing people and essentially just having a disingenuous claim to why people should buy your token.
Yep.
It's interesting. Well, how most of the old school Bitcoiners tend to refer to, you know, altcoiners or shitcoiners as promoters. I think that's kind of very telling for how they view it. I listened to your recent Hell Money podcast episode, and you know, you spent half of it talking about, you know, the history of Bitcoin and kind of leading up to ordinal theories and runes. But at the very end, there was an interesting point which I would like to get your opinion on or kind of expand on. You mentioned that runes could lead you, or it could be a possibility to lead you into the political, kind of the political realm of Bitcoin, and the Bitcoiners of the 6 people who kind of control the repo and the you know, how Bitcoin tends to be very has a high degree of social consensus. That's why there's not a lot of changes that happen. But by being able to bypass, I think it's the op return limit that puts you, you know, into that seat of having that discussion. First, for those that aren't aware of like what you're referring to when you mean like the Bitcoin political space, first, can you just discuss that? And then what do you think you could change? Or if you did get into that ring with those people who run the repo, what type of changes or conversation do you think you could spark that historically has not been introduced into that conversation?
Yeah, Bitcoin politics are super, super interesting. And I think it's just a very interesting and sort of unappreciated, it just works in an interesting and unappreciated way. So the 6 people that you're referring to, those are the maintainers of the Bitcoin repo on GitHub. So github.com/Bitcoin/Bitcoin. That is Bitcoin Core, which is the reference implementation of Bitcoin. It has a lot of contributors, a lot of people working on it, but there's a small number of people who are called maintainers, and those are the people who can actually merge a code into the Bitcoin code base. They don't necessarily write all the changes, but they're the ones who, you know, push the button that takes a proposed change and turns it into an actual change to Bitcoin Core. So I know that sounds like insanely centralized and like, oh my God, what are you talking about? Like 6
high
people,
priest.
like,
We call them the high priests over here.
yeah. I mean, they are like high priests. So there's a bunch of things to keep in mind. So one is that they can make changes to Bitcoin Core, but nobody has to run their changes, right? If they made an unpopular change, there's a very serious possibility that people would reject that change by not running their software. Bitcoin is open source, and there are many forks that add features or remove features or whatever. And so everybody has the option not to run Bitcoin Core. And Bitcoin Core does not auto update. If you install Bitcoin Core, you do not automatically get changes that are made to the code in the future. You actually have to download and apply those changes. So they are sort of like powerful, but they're powerful in kind of like a limited sphere. And they kind of know that like, okay, like we can't just, you know, push through controversial changes. And then aside from that, so then that's like sort of like how it works. You have like the small amount of people working on Bitcoin Core who actually have merge permissions. And then you have all these like Bitcoin users who are running full nodes. And so then the other side of the coin is like, well, how do soft fork changes get made to Bitcoin? Like, how does the Bitcoin protocol get upgraded? And so this is kind of the really hairy part of Bitcoin politics, because it is a absolute mess. It is a complete mess, right? You have all these users. It's sort of like a mob, right? And if you want to get a change through, you have to get like a plurality or like a super majority of users to get behind that change. It's not, there's no formal governance process. There's no vote. It's not democracy, but I want to say that it's like something that's kind of better than democracy. Democracy is essentially a way that, like, yes, we all have like very, idealistic notions about democracy, but democracy makes it very easy to push unpopular changes through, in the sense of like, hey, if you have a 60% majority that supports the change, but it's like injurious to a 40% minority, democracy will just like let that happen. Like, right, that change will go through, 40% of people will get fucked, 60% of people will be happy, which kind of seems like a pretty bad outcome to me. So Bitcoin is not like that. Like, you have this mob and you have to convince enough people, you have to quote unquote get consensus behind a change for that change to be made successfully. Because if you make that change and there's not consensus, again, in like scare quotes, like what does consensus mean? That change is not going to happen. And the best model for like what does consensus mean is that the overwhelming majority of economic participants in Bitcoin, kind of weighted by their economic weight, go along with that change or not. So what do I mean by economic weight? Like, let's say I'm a user of Bitcoin and, I accept Bitcoin for things. I buy Bitcoin on exchange. And then when I take the Bitcoin off the exchange, I check if my full node has accepted it, or I get Bitcoin from other people. If I don't go along with the soft fork and other people are using that soft fork and they send me money, but they're doing it on their, forked change that I didn't go along with, I will be like, I don't see the money, right? My node is telling me that you did not send me that money. And so if like enough people are not running the change and their economic weight is like kind of not behind that change, you can't make that change, right? You can make that change on your own, but nobody else will accept your Bitcoin. So that's kind of like what consensus is on Bitcoin. It's this rough kind of weird mob rule process, which is biased towards the status quo. It's biased towards not making changes, and it's not formal, and it's kind of based on like what everybody goes along with. And that sounds incredibly messy. It sounds like crazy, but I kind of think that it's better than a lot of the alternatives. A lot of people they have these ideas about like formal governance, and you're going to put things to a vote, and people are going to do like a token weighted vote, or you're going to have some like crazy multi-sig that the leaders of the project are going to like vote on things. And I think that those are just all kind of strictly worse than the informal social consensus model of improving and changing Bitcoin. And so, yeah, and I can go on a little bit about like me jumping into that process personally and my sort of history with that. But I want to, like, if anybody wants clarifications or wants to ask questions about that, because I think that Bitcoin governance is a very interesting and kind of subtle topic.
Interesting. Yeah. Good call there. Because I know we'll probably sit on this for a little while. Dima, what's good, bro?
Hey, what's going on? Really, thanks for having me up here. Yeah, so I was just in Amsterdam, in London now, and I met Raf because I really want to contribute to Ord, and I knew I was coming here, so I figured I'd speak with him, and we had a great chat. But I'm building out StatScreener, among other things. We index rare Satoshi marketplaces to find like historical floor prices for rare sats, and eventually you're gonna be able to buy through our site to all the other marketplaces. But we really like runes here, and I was wondering, how can we be one of the first people to have analytics for runes? And potentially, can I contribute? I don't know if runes is fully open source or if it's just you and Raf right now, but how could I contribute to runes, number one? And number two, how could we be, the first ones to provide data analysis as well as analytics and charting and things like that?
Yeah, great. Yeah, I mean, it's all open source. It's all happening in the Ord repo. I've kind of cordoned off discussion into the Runestone repo to kind of keep it out of the main repo, just while it's at this sort of like very there's like a lot of discussion about sort of like how the protocol should work, and I want to keep that in that repo. So you'll see me make changes to Ord and like land those changes that like implement runes in Ord. But then if you want to check out that other repo where we're sort of talking about bigger design questions, you can go to github.com/kc/runestone. And then as far as analytics goes, I guess it's it's going to be part of Ord. It's already part of Ord. We sort of have this setup for doing APIs or an API in Ord. There are already some JSON endpoints that are exposed. Runes are pretty simple, so I don't think that there are going to be many APIs necessary to add to Ord. But if you're doing analytics or you want to do analytics, I think probably the best way to do that would be to I don't know if now would be a good idea. I think maybe once it gets to the point where like I'm actually encouraging people to test it on Signet to kind of see what you would need in terms of like API functionality, and either contribute that or, well, first step is like to make an issue and like see what you need in terms of indexing runes, and then to like the API endpoints, and then either like start contributing those PRs. The PRs to add an API endpoint are actually pretty simple. You just sort of like take one of the server endpoints and you do something differently if they pass the accept JSON header, and then you just return the data from the index as JSON. I assume that that's the main thing that you guys would need is just good APIs from Ord. But yeah, I'm really interested in, like, I kind of write Ord and I don't really know what people do with it, you know? So yeah, I'm very interested in supporting, like, I would really like it if Ord was a good backend for writing these kinds of like higher level like services on.
For sure. I appreciate that. You'll see me in the GitHub, and I look forward to chatting more.
Awesome. Yeah. One thing that I could imagine being useful is like, if you want to do incremental indexing, right? You don't want to like have to rescan the whole index, is like maybe something that allows you to get which runes were created in a particular block. And then that would allow you, if you want to plug it into another database, to like incrementally be like, okay, request block 0, request block 1, or whatever. And so you can like increment the chain, like process the chain incrementally, so you can put it into your own database and like keep subscribed for updates.
That's kind of exactly what I'm doing for, we started on Stacks. That's what I'm doing for Stacks tokens, more or less. It's a little bit like whitelisting for like swap contracts that we care about. But with on runes, you know, I don't really have to do that. Like I'll care about every rune transaction. So yeah, that probably makes sense. I'll see you in GitHub. Let's leave it at that.
Awesome. Yeah, I encourage people to participate in GitHub. I think it can be frustrating because me and Raf are super like bandwidth limited. But we do really appreciate it when people make issues just asking for the things they need. Sometimes we can't do it just because we're rate limited and there are other things that are like more pressing, but it is really valuable to know what user pain points are. So yeah, we do, like, if you have a problem, I mean, definitely check if there's already an issue. If you have a feature request, definitely check if there's already an issue for it. But I would encourage people to get on GitHub and sort of like make issues. Like there's been times that people have like created features like off in the community that we just had no idea that they were using things in a certain way. And like maybe we wound up like breaking their use case. I think there was, I kind of forget what it was. I think one of the metadata protocols that relied on reinscription using metadata, that I think we broke for some reason. And it was because they had just sort of like, if they had told us, we could have told them like, oh, okay, like, yeah, don't do that, like do this other thing. So I think engaging us is like super useful, so we can just make sure that like just know what people are doing and try to like accommodate that as much as possible.
Trevor, you're a partner at the Bitcoin Frontier Fund. You're early Stacks investor. You're a stamps connoisseur. What's your take on Bitcoin governance?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough problem, and it's a great thing to, I guess, familiarize yourself with and just to understand. And like there's never any best answer. There's only trade-offs for different scenarios. Like certain like governance structures for, say, like a company are better in a certain environment. Like in the military, you need a very hierarchical structure to be successful. In an innovation environment, you need a very flat structure to be successful. So I'm sure people will write books about, the difference in governance in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And I think the Bitcoin governance system is actually pretty good for the general like thing that Bitcoin is trying to be, which is this like leaderless and maybe I don't like the word leaderless because I think we need leaders, but like this owner, no one owns the Bitcoin blockchain. It's permissionless. And I think the more decentralized and the more chaotic, potentially, the more durable or the slower it's going to change. I think it's kind of like a feature, not a bug. I'm curious though from Casey's perspective, because the way that he launched Ord, I think was like the ideal way if you want to build something on Bitcoin is like to have, separate node software that then like whenever you want to go to market, you want to do it so in like the lowest risk way possible. Like if Casey, if you were like trying to change Bitcoin Core, like we wouldn't have Ordinals today. Like you found a way to, create a very low risk, like add on to Bitcoin Core that allowed people to do like cool new stuff. And like I would love to see. I recommend that everybody learn from that example and try to take that approach. To get things with like grassroots adoption rather than trying to like write a BIP and get people's approval and then like test it out. But for some things, I'm curious your thoughts. Like, just take like drive chains purely as an example, not to say it's good or bad or I'm a fan of it or not, but like, there are probably some changes that require consensus change, but also that don't necessarily change anyone's experience. That's not using those features. So, and maybe this is this is my understanding of drive chains, but like the whole idea is that if we implemented drive chains, like maybe it gets adoption, maybe it doesn't, but we're in this period where like we don't know, like you kind of can't run the experiment until you do. And so the question is like, how could you enable, or maybe a better process for soft forks where like you reduce the risk and allow things to succeed or fail on the merit of the market adoption for those things that you actually need, that you can't do in the same way that Ordinals does. Because it would be great if like just let Paul launch drive chains and then like if no one adopts it, like then we have our answer. We can end this like multi-year debate over does the market want it, and if it doesn't change the experience of like the L1 users or like the main users, like what is the big problem, I guess? You see where I'm going?
Yeah, definitely. I think drive chains is a really tricky example because although it is true that the direct users of drive chain, or like many users, don't actually have to interact with drive chain, one of the concerns with drive chain is that it changes the mining dynamics and potentially leads to a really undesirable level of centralization. So kind of these knock-on effects that would eventually affect other L1 users. So maybe a easier example in this case is something like opctv, op check template verify. This is a change that was proposed by Jeremy Rubin, a longtime Bitcoin developer. And essentially what this would do is just add a single new opcode that would allow you to restrict the ways that your UTXOs that you were creating could be spent in the future. So you could sort of, there's a bunch of different applications. The easiest one to understand is maybe congestion control. You have a lot of users of an exchange. They want to get coins off the exchange and into their wallet. However, it's a very high fee period. So what you do is you create this one transaction that creates a single output that uses opctv. And what opctv would do in that case is constrain that output to the only way that output could be spent is sort of like unfurling that output into a tree of transactions that each leaf in the transaction pays one of the users that's making withdrawal. And so you can mine that transaction during a high fee period, but it's a small transaction, so you don't really care. You pay the fees, whatever. And then during a low fee period, the exchange or the users can start unfurling that transaction and get the coins actually into their wallet. A good way to think about this is it separates the sending and the receiving of coins. So you can send coins and kind of make sure that they're sent, but wait until later to actually be able to receive those coins, but guarantee that you can receive those coins after they've been sent. So That's OpsCTV. OpsCTV has been incredibly controversial. I think Jeremy maybe made a misstep in how he sort of pushed for the change, and I kind of know why he did it. Like, I think he got very, very tired of how contentious the process was and how slow the process was. And he sort of said, hey, here's a software client that implements OpsCTV. If anybody wants to run it, they can. And I think this is totally reasonable. You can put code out there and propose that people use it. Like, that's fine. I think a lot of people just took that very badly and thought he was like moving too fast. But anyway, so the reason I think OpsCTV is a good example, because it really does not affect anybody else. If you don't use OpsCTV, you do not have to care about it at all. It's a very, very small change to Bitcoin Core. It's a small enough change that one person can like review it and be like, okay, this makes sense. It changes a single opcode that you do not have to use. If you do not include OpsCTV in your transactions, you are not affected at all. But still, I think I think it potentially enables a lot of like very valuable and interesting things that people can experiment with. However, it's been very, very contentious. And I kind of think in this case, it's really unfortunate that it's been contentious. I think a lot of people are saying like, okay, well, you know, what if there's a better version of OpsCTV? What if we do OpsCTV and we figure out that something later on is better? And that holds up the sort of process. And I think that's really, really unfortunate that, you know, maybe OpsCTV is not perfect, but it's such a low impact change and enables so much experimentation. Like it would be great if we could kind of find a way to have the consensus to make those kind of the small changes. And so that's an example of something about Bitcoin governance that frustrates me. I think the status quo bias is very strong, and that's normally a good thing. And I think the degree of perfectionism is very strong, and that's normally a good thing. But I would very much like these sort of low impact changes to have a chance to go through so that people have a chance to experiment with them. But I do not have any bright ideas for how to, you know, make that happen, how to change the process such that we can get those changes.
Like, could there be a way to like roll back changes more easily? Like, or, you know, like generally just like reduce the risk, like of, hey, we test something out, you know, in a certain way, and then if it doesn't hit this criteria, like it's just cut out, or, you know, something like that. Because this whole like a reliance on like a big bang waterfall style development with like, you know, like you said, like perfectionism, you know, it probably does create too high of a bar for things that like, you know, like would be a more iterative approach of like, you know, like all the major Silicon Valley companies, Web2 companies like Facebook, these feature flags, right? And like they put out a new feature, they like test it on 1% of the users. If it has a good impact, they roll out to 10%. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, one of the issues is that rolling back or removing features from Bitcoin is basically impossible, because once you create a feature, like Bitcoin's sort of design and development philosophy is that you never break anybody's reasonable use of Bitcoin. If there are currently users doing something with Bitcoin, the developers never make changes that impact the way that those users are using Bitcoin. So this means that Bitcoin supports a lot of weird stuff in the scripting language. It supports a lot of different address types, because even as changes are made, you know, we never want to, you know, if somebody writes a wallet that uses OpsCTV or something, and they just never want to upgrade their Bitcoin Core node, and they never want to change their code after they've written it, that's actually totally reasonable. They shouldn't have to change it. So the issue is that if you roll back changes, then all of a sudden you're really damaging users. And so it's like it's very, very hard to roll back changes. I could maybe imagine something where you're like, okay, we're doing OpsCTV as a test for a year and you can use it on mainnet, but you know, after a year, you know, OpsCTV is just going to be a no op, so maybe your coins go away. But I think we would still have the very hard question of you know, what sort of tests to do. But yeah, really the like the upshot here is that you can add things, but then removing them is impossible. You just have to support them forever, because somebody has it as part of their like crucial workflow.
Great conversation. BZ, what's up?
Hey everyone, hey Casey. Yeah, thank you. First of all, like for making Bitcoin super fun, Casey. So my question to you is, well, yeah, ever since Runestone kind of got like introduced, it has like shaken like the ordinal space, especially at BRC20 token holders, right? And to give some background, it's like that I have asked Domo Data his stance in terms of Runestone, like will we have two fungible token standards on Bitcoin that'll be dominant, or will there only be one? And he basically answered me this: if standards are too similar and serve the same purpose, there can only be one. If I think about Ethereum, and I have done Ethereum for a number of years, I can't think of a fungible token standard other than ERC20. If they're too similar, what emerges is the most dominant. But if one is great at one thing and the other is great at another thing, I think there is a place where they can both coexist. So I'm really curious, Casey, what is your stance? Like, what do you expect is going to happen regarding these two fungible token standards like Runestone and BSC20?
Yeah, I really honestly have absolutely no idea. I'm doing runestones because I think, or runes because I think it's sort of technically superior and has some desirable properties compared to BRC20. But it's always the case that when there's a new technology, even if it's better, it might not be able to make inroads against a existing technology. Yeah, I will say that I think that Taproot Assets is probably also a very likely contender to compete successfully with BRC20. Taproot Assets is a protocol by Lightning Labs, and sort of different from Runes or BRC20. It has no on-chain footprint. So this has positives and negatives, but it's a very sophisticated, very high quality protocol. So I think that's also definitely in the running. There's another protocol called RGB. RGB is kind of more complicated, and to my mind, it's kind of been stuck in development hell for a long time. And I kind of don't know, like, if it will successfully emerge from development hell and get much adoption. But yeah, as far as runes go, honestly, I have no idea. I think it could become popular. I think some of the integration with Ord is like very cool. The way that you can link inscriptions to runes. But yeah, I have no idea. A lot of the reason that I'm doing it is kind of because it's fun. I sort of saw somewhere in the design space that you could kind of make an interesting protocol in this way. But I wouldn't be too upset if some other protocol became the dominant like token standard on Bitcoin.
Casey, I love earlier that you brought up the parallel to Las Vegas. I'm born and raised in Las Vegas. I worked on the strip for 10 years between nightclubs and day clubs and things of that nature. So I love that kind of that reference there. So as you build Runestone and you're thinking about this parallel of Vegas and degens and kind of this fun casino, you mentioned earlier that you hope that Ordinals gets to a point where there's a social consensus that basically is satisfied where it is, and it kind of stays in this almost static state for a long time unless something's needed. Whereas on the other side, if you're running something that's the equivalent of a casino, it needs consistent change, it needs consistent innovation. This is what happens in Las Vegas a lot, where old casinos are consistently fizzle out and something else pops up, or the kind of incumbent casinos are continually innovating and adding new kind of features and things that exist in the clubs or within the casino and on property. Are you kind of approaching runes and Runestone in a similar way, that this is kind of your creative casino in this kind of like metaphor idea, and that you continually are going to use that as this creative outlet to build on?
Yeah, so I think probably not. I think the protocol runes is even simpler than inscriptions, I would say, even simpler than inscriptions and ordinals. And so I think that like I'm kind of I think that most of the use cases or features are things that I've kind of contemplated and I'm like adding in the beginning. So I very much hope that I can get it essentially finished and my ideal is that I get all the features in on day one, and there are no features that are really like major features that are left out. I don't know how realistic that is. You know, it might be the case that you know, there are things that, you know, need to be added, or things that, you know, new features that people come up with that are very desirable. I kind of hope not, and I think maybe the design is simple enough. I think the layer of innovation ideally is happens on top of runes. You know, happens in the individual shitcoiners and meme coiners, and the tokens that they create on top of it, and the communities that they create on top of it. I also hope that markets can sort of happen on a layer above the protocol, so that you can innovate markets on top of runes without needing to actually change the protocol. So hopefully runes can be more like poker chips and not like casinos, you know, where the casino can like have their chips that they're all the same at every casino, and then do the innovation in terms of like what games and stuff they offer on top of those that use those chips.
Interesting. I love the approach. Hashtags media. Go ahead. Saw you have your hand up.
Yeah. Hey. I guess I just wanted to come up because I've never got the chance to just thank Casey for creating Ordinals. I think it's just amazing what is going to be able to be created to ultimately like help change the world, and I'm just happy to be a part of it. And you know, I just first and foremost just want to do that. I'm not trying to come up here and ask you questions, but I did have a question for you if you have time to answer it, in regarding like just the protocol like update. So like if you don't have time, that's okay, but I just wanted to ask like.
No, I think first off, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate the kind words. I think I don't know if you cut out for everybody else, but I didn't get that question.
Dude, that was literally right as he was about to ask the question. You cut out. So yeah, can you repeat that?
Oh yeah. So I guess the question would just be like, when do you expect the protocol to update to the 1.0?
Yeah, like 1.0 is something that people talk about, although I don't think that we've, you know, me and Raf and the other devs have actually talked about like what that would mean for 1.0. But I think in practical terms, like in terms of the protocol having all the features that it needs, I think that should happen relatively quickly. I'm trying to think of like what features we want to add as far as like, you know, things that actually change the protocol, and I think that there's very little. I think there's a few tiny things like multiple parents, but one big one is making it so that inscriptions that previously would have been cursed are not cursed going forward. That's a big change. So that requires like sort of community-wide like a sort of upgrade, because people need to like run the new version of Ord to agree on these new inscription numbers. So that's like a change that we want to like advertise very widely. So I think maybe that's the next like big milestone. And yeah, I hope that happens soon. Me and Raf are working on a release. Right now we're working on getting batch inscriptions in, which is a big, very, very complicated, very scary change to the wallet. Yeah, wallet changes are the absolute scariest part of doing the protocol. I hate writing code that actually creates Bitcoin transactions, because you can nuke people's funds. You can nuke people's rare and exotic sats. So that's always very scary. But yeah, we're working on that. We'll do a release of that. That's probably going to be 0.10. And then we'll probably like step back and look seriously about like what the timeline should be for the Jubilee. And maybe that we can consider that. Maybe not 1.0, because 1.0 is like often a very serious milestone, but like Ordinals like beta, you know, when it's no longer alpha technology, and that could happen like pretty soon. I would say if me and Raf get this release out in a couple days, we could sit down and like be like, okay, like we need to give people enough time, and maybe it's going to be a month or like 2 months that we like pre-announce that it's going to happen at a certain block height, get a release out, and then everybody can all, you know, be on that release for when that block height comes around.
Sorry, I just want to hijack. Go ahead.
Could you definitely say what happened before the happening?
Oh, I don't actually know. When is the happening?
I'm a Bitcoin newbie, so you tell me.
I think it's in
It's
like
like
April.
April.
Yeah, it's like April.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
So-
definitely before the happening. I think definitely that's a bunch of time.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for your
questions,
time,
man.
Casey. I really appreciate it.
No, man, it's
yeah,
my pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, what you guys are doing, like, I don't know where you guys find the time or how you can afford to do it, but just thank you so much for everything you do. I know the entire On-Chain Monkey community is very thankful for you and your team.
Just about batch inscriptions, Casey, specifically just going to hijack this because it was brought up. Is it correct to assume that, so because of batch inscriptions, you can do like a mint with like, you know, for 1,000 potentially ordinals and much less transactions than you would have done originally. But is that dependent upon the size of each ordinal? Because you can only fit so many in each batch inscription. So if you were to do like a 1,000-piece collection and each ordinal is individually like, you know, 5 KB as opposed to something like 20, then you're limited by the size of the ordinal, correct, for each inscription?
Yeah, that's correct. Batch inscriptions, each time you do a batch inscription, all the inscriptions in that batch are going to be included in one transaction. And so that means that you can run into the standardness limit of 400,000 bytes. So if you want to do a larger batch inscription, you would have to submit that to miners to get them to like accept that transaction. CB Spears is waving his hand. I think maybe CB Spears, if you want to get a non-standard transaction into a block, you should talk to him and Hashbender. Yeah, and actually this kind of circles back to talking about Bitcoin politics. The reason I was talking about on the podcast, at Hell Money Podcast, hellpodcast.money, wherever fine podcasts are sold, you can tune into that. But the reason I was talking about that is because runestones have to fit into an op return. I use the term runestone to mean the message that goes into an op return that creates or transfers runes. And op returns are limited to 80 bytes of additional data by standardness rules. So you can create a transaction that has a greater than 80 byte op return and get it into a block and get it accepted, but it won't be relayed through the mempool. And so I'm sort of like imagining that in the future, if runes get a lot of use and people would like to do transactions that, for example, transfer a lot of runes in a very complicated way, pay out runes, different amounts of runes to many, many different people, for example, like exchange withdrawals, that they might want to make runestones that are larger than 80 bytes. And if there was significant amounts of people that wanted to do that, that would be something where Bitcoin Core might wind up changing that limit. The reason being that when you run a Bitcoin Core node, you want to have an accurate picture of what transactions are likely to get into the next block. And if you're running Bitcoin Core and you're limited to 80 bytes in an op return, but a lot of people are making transactions that are larger than 80 bytes, you're essentially not seeing those transactions when you try to figure out what might get into the next block. So regardless of Bitcoin Core's feelings about whether or not you should on runes or whether the op return should be increased, I think there's a very good chance that if there was significant demand for op returns larger than 80 bytes and people started to make them, one thing that I would do is I would start encouraging miners to run Bitcoin Core configured to accept op returns larger than 80 bytes. I would probably make a page on the website that explained how and why miners would want to do that. I would probably start contacting, individual miners and being like, hey, like they're users, they want to mine these transactions. And I would probably start kind of collecting a list of nodes that were connected to each other and connected to miners that would relay these larger transactions. And this would be sort of indirectly throwing my hat into the ring of like Bitcoin politics, like changing Bitcoin Core. But before I never wanted to do that because it just looked like an absolute nightmare. Like when you want to make a change to the Bitcoin protocol or you want to make a contentious change to Bitcoin Core, it's like this mess. It's like you get all these like deranged people coming out of the woodwork saying that you're like, trying to destroy Bitcoin or whatever. But I'm much more comfortable doing it in this like indirect way where there's an incentive to change, and then that incentive is like maybe fuel the fire of that incentive eventually, and then Bitcoin Core responds to that incentive because it basically reflects the ground truth. And I think that could happen both with the size of op returns, and it might also happen with the size of that 400,000 byte standardness limit. That limit, the kinds of transactions that are used with inscriptions, which are transactions that all have SegWit inputs, that the reasons for that limit don't actually apply. So if there's significant demand for larger inscriptions being mined and larger batch inscriptions being mined, such that there was users consistently bypassing the mempool, Bitcoin Core could very easily lift that restriction. It's like a very, very small, just a few line change. And so I think that's the kind of thing that might happen. It might be, me indirectly throwing my hat into the bloody arena of Bitcoin politics.
I was gonna jump in because you mentioned non-standard op returns, Casey. I haven't looked at the latest editions of the repo, but for the rune casting, or etching, if you will, are you still proposing 2 op returns to initiate a rune, or has that been reduced to 1?
Yeah, it's a single op return, and the actual payload of the runestone can be encoded in any number of pushes within that op return. It sort of isn't sensitive to the size of pushes. Pushes are just concatenated together. So yeah, it's just 1 op return, and it's up to 80 bytes of pushes after that op return that then get concatenated together and interpreted as a runestone.
Solid. Elok, what's good, bro?
Yeah, so I want to talk about multi-inscribe and then like parent-child and I guess the Jubilee. So like with parent-child, it's cursed now, and I've been talking about it in the repo a lot. And then like will we be able to do multi-inscribe parent-child? Because like, we have like CF, you have to like pass the parent through. So like you can only do like 25 per block, right? So like, is that going to be later in multi-inscribe, or are you going to do that like together? And then will they be like cursed because they'll be like a different index, right?
Yeah, so the first version of batch inscriptions will include the ability to include a parent of all of the inscriptions. That's clearly one of the biggest reasons that you might want to do a batch inscribe. You want a bunch of inscriptions to all have the same parent. You don't want to do a bunch of transactions in the mempool that are all going to be this weird, like dangly, Rube Goldberg machine of transactions that you're waiting to complete. So yeah, that'll go in the first version. And yeah, they will initially be cursed. Batch inscriptions, they use the pointer field, which is a new field that controls how an inscription lands in the output of the inscribe transaction. So yeah, initially, unfortunately, they'll be cursed, but Jubilee, on the way, hopefully soon. And honestly, I really appreciate the pressure you've been applying in the repo comments of like, come on, bro, like we got to uncurse these inscriptions, like let's go. So I do appreciate that, and it's like one of the pieces of feedback that I don't really know. I don't know how people feel about cursed inscriptions. Maybe they're fine with cursed inscriptions. So knowing that people care about having their inscriptions uncursed and we should like get a move on the Jubilee is super helpful.
Hey, Noam, how's it
How
going?
much is it like?
Sorry. Go ahead.
How much work would it be to like bless the prior, or is that just gonna be spaghetti code if we do that?
Yeah, I think that would be pretty bad. I think that it's okay. It wouldn't be too just be weird. Like you would have to insert them into the sequence at the Jubilee. So the inscription numbers would like increase in one block, of the Jubilee. They'd sort of increase by 200,000 or 300,000 or however many cursed inscriptions there are. There'd be this weird discontinuous jump. And then it isn't so bad for the code if we do it now. It is kind of bad for future upgrades. We hope that we don't have to introduce new kinds of cursed inscriptions in the future. We hope that the Jubilee is like one and done. But in the case that we wanted to do like a second Jubilee, that's when the logic would start to get really kind of gross. I do hope that people learn to appreciate and love their cursed inscriptions. In the future, it's going to be, post Jubilee, there's going to be no way to make a cursed inscription. And so, I hope that people like them as these like weird historical artifacts. And if people are like if people like feel like they're cursed inscriptions are like second class citizens, I don't know, maybe we could add like a spooky little emoji or something to the cursed inscription page. They're like a little bit, specialer to compensate for the fact that they're cursed.
Also, is there a way to do like parent-child with a re-inscription? So like the first inscription or something could be the parent? Because like I know that it doesn't really match up right.
I don't want to promise that that's possible, but I know that we do. We pass a re-inscription flag to the batch inscriptions. That is an interesting test case, and we should definitely test like how that works. I'm going to make a note of like what happens when you batch inscribe and inscribe onto the parent sat point. That's definitely a good thing to have a test case for and figure out how it works one way or another.
Hey, Num, what's going on?
Hey, what's up, Jake? Thanks for having me. I have a question on runes, Casey. Wondering how much different are they compatible to Taproot addresses? Sorry, would they sit like together with my inscriptions, like 20, or would it be really like separate address where we put all our runes? That would be my first question.
Yeah, so it's UTXO management is really tricky. You have a Bitcoin wallet consists of all these like little piles of coins, and UTXO management in Ord is already kind of tricky. We have these like cardinal inscriptions, which are inscriptions without, or cardinal UTXOs, which are UTXOs without any inscriptions. And then we have inscribed UTXOs, which are UTXOs with inscriptions. And probably the way that the Ord wallet is going to work is that we will sort of not put inscriptions. We won't mix inscriptions and runes on the same output. We'll sort of have an additional class of like runic UTXOs that only move as part of like rune transactions. But I mean, there's kind of no reason in principle that you couldn't do a whole bunch of wacky stuff, like that you couldn't, have a bunch of inscriptions on the same UTXO with runes sitting on them together. I'm like sweating a little bit. I'm like getting nervous because that sounds really, really complicated. But yeah, in principle, you could do that, although we probably wouldn't support that at the beginning.
Yeah, got it.
Shiv gun.
And the second question
afterwards. Go ahead, Nam.
Hey guys, how you guys doing? So I had a question about just a topic. It might be a bit of a noob question because I'm still quite new. What are cursed inscriptions?
So cursed inscriptions are me fucking up. Cursed inscriptions are a highly regrettable. They're essentially inscriptions that in the first version of Ord, it did not see those inscriptions, either due to bugs or due to like oversights in things that we would want to add in the future but didn't plan for adding. And so what we did was we recognized those. We changed Ord so that it would start to see those inscriptions. But in order to prevent these new inscriptions from disrupting inscription numbers, we started giving them inscription numbers starting from -1. So essentially they're in their own sequence. So they're a very regrettable hack that exists because I fucked up, that sort of gives these like new inscriptions a different sequence number. And the Jubilee that I keep ominously referring to, the Jubilee is like a tradition in different cultures, and I think it's in the Bible, where like all debts are forgiven and all sins are forgiven too sometimes. So the Ordinals Jubilee is the forgiving of technical debt and the forgiving of the sins of the old inscriptions. And so post Jubilee, new inscriptions that would have been cursed pre-Jubilee will get a positive inscription number. So yeah, that is the lowdown of inscription numbers of cursed inscriptions. Cursed inscriptions are entirely my fault and deeply regrettable that they exist at all.
Great explanation. Sorry, Num, we'll come back for your second question.
Yeah, thank you. I switched my network, should be better. Yeah, my second question would be, how to escape the mass while you launch the runes, because I remember Ordinals Wallet tried already to create runes. I think you can still inscribe them, but they're since the protocol is not finished, they were kind of experimenting, so it's not really final to create runes with them. When you launch it, may we have couple days before the announcement, hey guys, I'm gonna do it now, something like this, because I know first is first, but honestly we have so many people that are helping building this protocol and just asking questions, so maybe some kind of whitelisting, I would appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, I can't do whitelisting. I can't do any sort of preferential, whatever. But yeah, I wrote the blog post. I was talking on the space yesterday, in the Ordinal show. I was talking about how me and Aaron we were flying back from Singapore, and we were watching a Batman movie. And I was just sort of scrolling in my laptop, the protocol. And then I was like, hey, I'm going to write this blog post. And here's this funny protocol. And then there's this mass response to it that it was stupid that I wasn't expecting it, but I was not expecting people to be like, oh my God, runes meta, blah, 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 blah. And this half finished thing that wasn't even specified. So yeah, I want to try to avoid the chaos as much as possible. I hope to do that by having a relatively long period, maybe a month, where it's not going to be live on mainnet, but it is live on Signet, and just trying to get as many people as possible to test on Signet and to make it so that it's really not a surprise when the launch is, and it's just so that everybody has very clear expectations about when it's happening. And I think it will be a madhouse. I think it will be an absolutely insane madhouse, but hopefully it can be as not insane as possible.
Thank you so much, Casey, and I appreciate all the work you do for not just yourself but the whole community, and it's super cool to build with you.
Thanks. No, I really appreciate it. I mean, this would be a lot less fun, and I probably would not be doing it if there was not the same community response and all the positive vibes that I get from people. It's being able to write, every software developer wants to write code that people use, you know what I mean? And so I feel very lucky that there are a lot of people that like to use the code that I'm writing and care passionately about what it does and how it develops. So that's it's a blessing on my end as well.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be a little bit hard to prevent the chaos. I already see people throwing out 9-figure market caps on the what they expected to hit. Adam, what's your takeaway from the last hour and a half talking with Casey?
That people are excited for runes. It's people are always excited for what's next. And especially in crypto. And so I'm actually curious how you're considering rolling it out, beyond maybe setting a block height where it goes on this particular block height, which everybody then rushes in at that block height. Are you thinking to kind of have this built out a little bit more, maybe, or well, just your general thoughts? What else are you thinking at that time? What else do you think needs to be in place before it gets before it's launched, so that you don't run into just massive regrets or problems?
Yeah, so I'm hoping that the code can be feature complete and kind of have all the features that it needs. I want to resolve all of the design questions. I want to write very extensive documentation. It'll probably be a section of the Ordinals handbook that will discuss runes from a very high level, from sort of a user level, okay, users of runes, how do they work? I'm also going to, I think, very, very, very heavily comment the rune code. We don't have a ton of comments for the Ordinals code, and so it makes the code base very hard to approach. But because I would like a lot of review and a lot of testing, the approach that I'm going to take is, and because runes is relatively a small part of the code base, is just very extensively commenting it and going like, okay, these are the data structures that involved. This is exactly how they get encoded from a transaction. And then when the index is processing each runestone, this is exactly the rules that it follows. This is how runes get allocated. This is what creates a new rune, and really get into the details, get into all the details of the encoding. And then really encourage people to read it, the code and the high level description, try to fix as many changes, as many problems as possible. And also maybe do a sort of code review live streams. I haven't figured out exactly how to do this, but I think the code can be very inaccessible to newbies, and also to people who just, I think it's inaccessible to like programmers in general. It's like weird hard code. So just do live streams. They'll probably be very long, where I just go over the code individually, ideally with some developers on the live stream who can ask questions, like ideally like newbie questions that like, I can try to clarify everything and walk through everything. Just in the hopes that I can get a lot of testing. That's what I'd really like. I'd like a lot of eyes on the protocol, because I really would like to avoid needing it to be changed in the future, and avoid, some mess where, there's a bug in the protocol. We've been very lucky that with ordinals and inscriptions, there essentially haven't been any of these like bugs in the protocol that have been serious problems that have been needed to roll back. We did need to create cursed inscriptions, but that didn't disrupt any of the existing inscriptions. And I believe we had, I don't know if it was a release that it messed up inscription numbers like a little bit, but those were kind of localized. My worry, and so we've been very lucky in that respect. My worry with runes is that I could write a bug which causes balances to be incorrect, or causes balances to be misallocated in some way that has to be fixed in a disruptive fashion. In a way where I have to implement a fix which is going to actually change rune balances, which is something that hasn't happened with ordinals and inscriptions. So my real hope is to avoid that, and I hope just getting a lot of people involved on Signet. I think that's going to be a real challenge, because nobody really cares about something until there's real money on the line.
Well, that was like my follow-up was like, well, what about like wallet integrations, right? Which is obviously a huge one. Is that possible to kind of do preemptively and have some wallets up to speed, before it actually launches?
Yeah, I actually think that maybe is possible. I don't want to commit to anything because I haven't really figured out whether it's practical, but I believe that runes are a sort of isolated enough change. They're sort of like very self-contained in the code base, that I might be able to extract it into a Rust library that anybody could use to build services, or do like a little bit better integration, so that they could, instead of having to build on Ord, that maybe they could sort of build, their own, at least things that like that create transactions, and some of the other things that they might want to do. So that's a possibility. I think it's going to be hard though. I think I kind of assume that people who are writing wallets won't really want to bother with it until it's on mainnet. But yeah, if there are people who are writing wallets, yeah.
I think you might be wrong there. I think there might be some real interest in being the first wallet and integrated and stuff.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Okay,
You
got
said
it.
TypeScript
Yeah.
library, right? TypeScript library. Because I feel like all the developers are using JavaScript.
Yeah, bro. Oh god, I don't want to write JavaScript. Like I'll do it, but I don't want to write JavaScript. But yeah, no, I mean that's honestly great to hear. I mean, I think engaging people ahead of time who want to build on top of it, not just because it helps them, it helps there be cool like services and wallets for users, but also because those developers are likely during integration to like have a lot of eyes on the protocol and be able to provide feedback on the protocol. So yeah, definitely if we can do that, that would be awesome. Heads up, I'm gonna have to dip in 10 minutes. I have a pottery class to attend.
Bro, I don't think you got near enough hate for that pottery. Your take on pottery the other day. I hit you with a lit'll bit. Would you watch Ghost on like a flight or something, and you were like, "Oh man, I got to do that, bro." Gotta do that.
So I have a hot take here that we keep bumping up against the standard rules, and if you talk to like Cypher, and I kind of agree with him, it's kind of bullshit because they can go, like the 4 mega block went in. So like, should we get rebellious and like open up an API to like Luxor and just start yelling at Core and being like, look, you're centralizing transactions because we're going around, or should we like soft fork at the same time, or do we just stay based and do everything within the parameters like you did with Ord?
No, I think pressure is good. I'd like to see the upper turn limit lifted. I would also like to see the transaction size limit lifted. So yeah, what I would suggest is talk to miners and be like, hey, like, can you lift this the upper turn limit? The upper turn limit is very easy. It's just a flag to Core that they would start running their full nodes that produce the block templates with. The transaction size standardness limit is a little bit trickier because there needs to be an actual code change to Bitcoin Core. However, that change is very small. So maybe what I would do there is I would create a fork of Bitcoin Core, and I would make that change in that repo with just that single change. Essentially what that change would be is that if a transaction had all SegWit inputs, then that transaction would be exempt from the size limit. And I don't know how you would package that code change in a way that miners would be comfortable running it. You might want to make a PR, like a sort of hopeless PR against Bitcoin Core, to try to get it reviewed and say like, hey, this is like contentious, but I believe this limit isn't needed for all SegWit input transactions. So get some review. And like, there are reasonable people working on Core. The unreasonable people are not usually the maintainers. The maintainers are pretty chill. And so if you can get a little bit of review and you can go, hey, miners, like this is the repo, this is the fork, this is the PR against Bitcoin Core, and just try to get as many miners to accept these non-standard large transactions, these non-standard large returns. And that's the best pressure on Bitcoin Core. They will eventually bend the knee if that happens.
Well, then like, would you support Ord to like run on that fork maybe, or like put an API to Luxor that we could just broadcast out and be like, look, you're centralizing Bitcoin, you motherfuckers.
I personally would never add a like way that would translate that would transmit to only one mining pool, because that is, unfortunate amounts of centralization. But I might try to see if it's possible to get a part of the Bitcoin network all relaying transactions to each other that are non-standard, and send and preferentially peer, tell people how they can preferentially peer their Bitcoin Core node, or hard code in a bunch of nodes in that network partition that are all relaying non-standard transactions. And then the miners, as long as they're part of the network, they would all get those transactions.
Because we have enough Ordinals, we could maybe get enough peers.
Well, I like your idea, Elok. Definitely gonna advocate for that particular addition to Ord. I'm just kidding. Well, I think I support what Casey's talking about, which is one of the issues that a lot of that your non-standard transactions have is just being relayed to mining nodes, and you can either submit those directly if miners were to provide a mechanism, or rather block producers pools, or to allow like direct transaction submission. But really, for kind of a more healthy Bitcoin network, it would be good if any node could reliably peer to other nodes and have that transaction propagated through the gossip network to a mining node, so it could reliably get into a block. That's what I would love to see.
So tell Cypher to write the PR for GitHub then.
All right, Case, I got one final question for you, and then we could kind of wrap this thing up. As I watched your recent episode of Hell Money Podcast, it kind of shows that you have a really firm and foundational understanding of Bitcoin history, and more so even kind of digital money. You go back and reference things like Bitcoin, like was it Hashcash, and I think DigiCash, and a few of these other things. B-Money. From that strong fundamental understanding of Bitcoin history, and as you build Ordinals and runes, what things or what scenarios of Bitcoin's past are you attempting to avoid and maybe improve on through these new protocols that you're establishing?
I mean, I guess, one thing I'm trying to avoid is predicating any changes that I want to make on Bitcoin changing, avoiding Bitcoin. I mean, trying to change Bitcoin is very, very hard, and just trying to think very creatively about how things can be built on layers on top of it. One other thing that I would like to avoid is just having these like obvious things that have product market fit not happen on Bitcoin. I think that if a sort of an appealing token protocol had existed on Bitcoin for a long time, I think that would have taken the wind out of a lot of other altcoins, and a lot of the wind out of a lot of the fluff out of the crypto ecosystem that really just wants to mint tokens and create altcoins that are purely there to justify minting tokens. So yeah, I'd like it if Bitcoin, and I think this naturally comes from the kind of developers who work on Bitcoin. I think that like, as an example, like I took NFTs pretty seriously. I thought like, okay, people like these things and people want to do it, and they're not going away. They're not just like purely scams. And so then I like sat down and thought really hard about doing NFTs on Bitcoin. And so I hope a lot of Bitcoiners, developers take that perspective and try to figure out how they can add things to Bitcoin, even if they aren't part of Bitcoin's original vision, because there's such strong market demand, and kind of prevent Bitcoin from being left behind a little bit in those arenas.
Very, very well put, man. Casey, I really appreciate you for coming on. If anyone didn't get their question answered, really sorry. Casey's been on his world tour, as I've seen, going through different types of spaces, talking about runes and everything. Casey, really appreciate your time, man. I know you've gotten a lot of flack over the last few months of some of these different decisions, but seems like you're growing and we're all growing together. So really appreciate for everything that you've done so far.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be on this space. It was a real fun conversation. It was a lot of fun for me too. And the flack, like, don't worry about it. I seem to be dealing with it very well. The inscription number, the great inscription number debate, that was a really lively debate. I really enjoyed everybody's feedback. It was a lot of fun, even though a lot of people disagreed with me and I didn't quote unquote get my way in the end. One thing that came out of that for me personally is like, well, like I'm kind of sad that, Christian inscription numbers are going to exist and we have to have this ugly spaghetti code. But I can just be like, yeah, I tried. It didn't work out, and kind of shrug my shoulders and be like, yeah, what are you going to do, bro?
Absolute beautiful. Yeah, as you said before, not everything's perfect. I think Udi said that in different spaces as well. There's bugs that exist in all of it. So appreciate it. And everyone that joined the space, just know Adam and I and Bunzi, we do this show Tuesday through Thursdays, generally 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. Make sure you give everyone a follow on the stage. Me, Adam, Emblem, Casey, Charlie, Bunzi, everybody. And until then, we'll see you guys next time. And Casey, enjoy your pottery and irregular shapes.
Thanks, guys.